This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. And that is why I have this wonderful guest on today. I've been talking to Nancy, got Nancy probably 10 years. We've been
Yes, I think so.
communicating back and forth. We both have sons who are on the spectrum. Now, if you're listening to this and you happen to be a parent of a child or even a young adult on the spectrum, you got to take care of yourself. You have to realize that you are special. And when you realize that you are special, then you will treat your child in the way they need to be treated. And I say that, I know that sounds very vague, and I'm sure Nancy will talk about this as well. But because our boys are so different and their diagnosis is similar but yet different, we've had to approach our boys much differently, but yet there's such a commonality. And that is when I learned my son was on the spectrum, I looked at the doctor and I said, wait a second, he was okay yesterday. He didn't have a fever, he didn't fall down and break a bone, and now he's on the spectrum. Like, what does all that mean? And I had a wonderful doctor who said to me, I love your attitude. Now go home and raise your son. My problem was the school did not want me to raise him as typical. They wanted me to raise him as a child with special needs. And yes, he had some, but for the most part, he could be integrated very, very well. So for all of you listening, this is a huge spectrum. And when my son was diagnosed, he was told he had Asperger's. So the autism community sort of didn't accept him because he had a different diagnosis. And now, I don't know if you know this, Nancy, but I just learned the other days, it's now autism 1, 2, and 3. Do you even know what that means? Because I don't.
They're changing it all the time, Karen. And, we go from, I think that the trend was for the last maybe decade was celebrating autism. And, a lot of the self advocates were, we're just, different minded, we're differently abled, and that is true. And we do want to celebrate them, but we cannot negate the children that are severely affected.
Right.
That is a big thing. And those parents, let me tell you, when you have a child that is self injurious, biting themselves to the point they have to go to the emergency room to get treated, when you have a child that doesn't sleep all night, when you have a child that is banging their head against a wall and has to wear a helmet all day, you're not really celebrating the difference. So I do want to acknowledge that community, you and I, within our journeys, and each journey is different, just as each woman, each parent is authentically yourself, right? We
Right.
all have our authentic self. Well, our children do too, right? So each person has a different journey, but I believe there are lessons along the way. And that hopefully you and I can help impart to some families that we've learned from our journeys. And let's face it, life is a series of train wrecks with
Right.
breaks in between, right? And we have to learn to take care of ourselves first and foremost, because if you don't take your oxygen mask first, you cannot take care of your child.
Absolutely. Now, you personally went through a number of things, even before you got Wyatt. And I say got Wyatt because I too went through infertility. I didn't think that was an issue for me. I had a son already who was 14, well, 13 years old when we started our journey and couldn't get pregnant. And when I finally did get pregnant, and then 5 years later, when he got diagnosed, my family in their kindness, blamed my late term pregnancy for his autism. And for those of you listening, it has nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with it. But that's how my family coped with it.
Yeah, we all want to point a finger, right?
That's
But
right.
what caused it? Da 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 da. And that becomes irrelevant. Whether I believe, and I do, by the way. Well, I believe that autism is a complex disorder that has a lot to do with biological factors. It has a lot to do with environmental factors, and that is and they've proven it. That's everything from pollution to our food supply, to our water, to our foods. And I believe vaccines play a role. That's my truth. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's somebody else's truth, but I do know that at 13 months, when my son received his actually a slew of vaccines that day, and his mumps, measles, and rubella, which I had asked the doctor if I could space out, and he made me feel like an idiot. He said, "Well," he handed me a Xerox paper from the CDC and said, "Vaccines are completely safe." And so I went ahead. And that night, Wyatt had 104 fever and febrile seizures. And it was after that that he changed. Now, please note, I'm not saying that those vaccines caused his autism. He was adopted. His family, his birth mother's side, not the birth mother, but the maternal grandparents had severe drug addiction issues. Do I think that played a role? I do. We lived right near a freeway. Could that have played a role? It could have. But, I think it was Science Today magazine said if if genetics is the gun, environment is the trigger. So I urge parents to find out all they can about boosting. Most of our kids would have what they call an MTHFR gene, and that means they have an inability to methylate toxins properly. My son has it. And we need to do everything we can to keep their diets clean, to give them the nutritional needs they need. And in some cases, there are detoxification methods. This is called the biomedical approach.
Right.
And I certainly took it once. Wyatt was 3 when we started all this, or even 4, because I was in denial. We got a late diagnosis. They said PDDNOS, which means pediatrician doesn't diagnose, in my opinion. So, but in fact, he was severely autistic. He met all 3 domains, lack of social communication, repetitive behaviors, and lack of communication. So, I had to do a lot of research myself, and I had been a television producer for 25 years, and then I co-authored 2 books on fearless aging. I was in my late 40s. What did I know about fearless aging then? I'm going to be 70 next year. But, I decided that if I was going to help my son and still have a career, I had to work in the field of autism. And it all kind of just happened organically. Confession here, I wanted Wyatt to get behavior therapy through Center for Autism and Related Disorders, which is one of the top providers of behavior therapy in the world, and headed up by Dr. Doreen Granpeche, which many people might know her name. She's probably the expert on autism behavior. And so I got this postcard in the mail, and it said, "Will you help throw a backyard fundraiser for this new organization, Autism Care Today?" And I said, "I'd love to," because I found out Dr. Doreen was the head of this new nonprofit. And I said, "I'd love to," and I said, "By the way," and at that point, we lived in Hidden Hills, which is, the home of the Kardashians and many other celebrities. And I said, I'll do better than that. I was in television, and I'll ask Tom Bergeron, who did Dancing with the Stars, who I produced, God, 40 years ago, and Lisa Gibbons, I was her executive producer to host. And I'll invite all of Hidden Hills. Well, I had no idea if Tom would do it or Lisa. I was bluffing
Right.
and doing what I had to do for my kid. I said, but I'm not going to do, I'm on a waiting list. And this is probably revealing too much, and maybe it just happened that I hit the top of the waiting list. But suddenly I said, I'll do all this, but I need to get my son therapy,
Right.
behavior therapy. He's having 5 tantrums a day. I'm covering the bite marks and the scratches on my arms with makeup. He's in pain, and he needs this therapy. So he got the therapy. And then I threw the fundraiser. I called it Denim and Diamonds for Autism. It was at the place we used to live before my husband passed away. We had a small ranch in Hidden Hills with horses, and I threw the fundraiser, and I had the directory, so I invited all of Hidden Hills, and literally 200 people came, and we raised like 30,000. And so Doreen asked me to be on the board. And then a short time later, I became executive director of the nonprofit. So it was a blessing because I was able to work in a field that could help my son. If I couldn't have worked in television anymore, I couldn't be even writing the books because it would take time away from him, and I needed to focus on him. And I had a home office, and I put 2 signs over the door. One said Autism Central, and the other one said University of Google. And Karen, I don't know if you remember, back in the days, our kids were diagnosed. There was
Very
not that
early
much.
on. Yep.
No, on the internet, no. I did go to Defeat Autism Now conferences. They are now called, okay, 69-year-old brain. They're called something else now. I'll think of it.
Okay.
But those were very helpful. And then I started learning I am a big believer in ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. I have a friend who thinks it's abusive. Good ABA is not abusive. It is not abusive. Now, back in the day when it was first, developed, they used what was called negative to extinguish behaviors. They would squirt kids with water bottles. I don't think any ABA out there does that kind of thing anymore.
It's interesting. ABA is great for many on the spectrum. My son, at the age of 7, said to his therapist, I'm not doing this therapy anymore. I'm not a Pavlov dog. We looked at him like, how do you even know this even exists? And he said, treat me like a boy. But her therapy, it was ABA. And so she tried to disguise it. And about a year later, he said to us, I don't want to go anymore. I'm not learning. And so we stopped therapy because we couldn't find anybody. Now, this is back in the 90s, everyone, when things were just really developing. And now, as a young adult, he'll even say, some of those things I learned in ABA, I remember, and it's helping me as an adult. So, there's not just one therapy out there, but you've got to try, you've got to work at it. And you made the comment before, you have to commit to it.
And listen, I didn't walk this walk perfectly. Like I
None
said,
of us did.
I was in denial, because I didn't know where to turn. And I got some very bad advice. I got, a neighbor told me my next door neighbor told me she thought Wyatt had autism. I called the pediatrician. He goes, that's ridiculous. Since when did plastic surgeons' wives start diagnosing autism? And then the wild goose chase for a diagnosis started.
Yeah.
And, like I said, first PDD, NOS, pervasive developmental disorder, nonspecific. And nobody told me about regional center, which is what we have here in California to give services. Oh, as a matter of fact, the school district told me, he was in preschool. The psychologist there said, oh, regional center, they do things like horseback riding and gymnastics. Hello. You know, it, Here's the best way to learn the ropes. Ask another mom. the,
Exactly.
the moms know. They know more than the pediatricians. They know more than the educators. They know more than the experts. The moms know. And if you see a mom that you feel has walked her path, yeah, she'll have stumbles. But if you see a mom that you think is doing a good job with that child of theirs or young adult, ask for advice. Ask for advice, right?
Absolutely. And there is a great group, I will say, on Facebook now that is parents of autism. And these
Yes.
parents are asking the perfect questions. I didn't even know how to ask these questions back in the 90s. But,
Right.
you know, I'm going out there and sharing my path, my son's path, and letting people know that you don't have to do it exactly the same way. But like you did, you found something very special in Wyatt. And you told me this offline about him being a year old and playing with paint. How did you even know that this might be something that he would accelerate at?
I meant to give you the photo. I have many actually. Um, okay, so Wyatt, um, around the age of 1, we had out back at our home, our little ranch home, we had some stalls. And my husband, my late husband's mother, was an artist, and he saved all of her art, smocks, easels, even paints, but all of her brushes. So we created an art studio out there. And prior to that, I would put Wyatt in his swim diaper and I would put finger paints on a table. And I have a darling picture of this. But
Yeah,
anyway, he is in the swim diaper covered his body. I mean, sometimes he just paint himself, right?
sure.
But, but what I saw was a spark of imagination and creativity. So I then took him out to that little art studio, and I have pictures of him as a 2 year old. He's got a paintbrush in his hand and he's painting. And then this is a good aspect of ABA if you have a good ABA provider. Um, Wyatt's main stem, self stimulatory behavior,
Sure.
which most of our kids have, splashing water. So he would be in the pool and he would splash water all around the pool to cool the tiles off. And then he discovered he liked that. And I think what happens, Karen, is he sees patterns. Well, he's told me because he likes to splash during the day because he likes to see the light and the patterns.
Sure.
So what we did was, because he would splash literally 24/7, 365, if he could take a break for eating. So what we did was, what I did first was I put a paintbrush in his hand and I got a cup of water and I said, look, you can splash, paint, water, paint, water. Bingo. And this is what's called purposely shaping a stem, a self-stimulatory behavior. And I'll give you another example. My friends Peter and Crystal Shepard, whose son Logan played at the Greek Theater with Ringo Starr and sat in for the drummer of Toto,
Wow.
um, he hand flapped. Well, Peter was a rock and roll guy back in the day. and he put drumsticks in Logan's hand. There you go. So oftentimes moms and dads will say to me, well, Wyatt's got a talent, his art. And I'll say, oh, it didn't always look like a talent. So I'll say, what is your kid, what do they like to do? First of all, let's zero in on what they like. I mean, what gives them joy? What gives them and you may think it's something that you don't like if they're on their video games all day.
Right.
But who knows that your child might not grow up to be a video game developer, right?
Exactly.
We have to think outside the box. And for Wyatt, and then you have to bring in people to nurture the
Right.
talent.
Exactly.
Like Paola Luther, Wyatt's art teacher, brilliant. And she had a cut. I found her on the Nextdoor app. Her husband said, my wife is a brilliant art teacher. I went on her website and I reached out to him, and she had a cousin, an adult cousin with autism, and she had a special place in her heart for him. Now, she had never taught a special needs child, and she and Wyatt are magic together. It's almost like the way Annie Sullivan was with Helen
Right.
Keller, you
Yes.
know. And some of these teachers have a real gift. Educators, I have had specific teachers that really knew how to unlock the mysteries of autism. I've had him in programs, Elaine Hall, the Miracle Project. He's done theater with the Miracle Project with Elaine Hall. He's getting ready to get his black belt in karate. We found first a teacher, a young guy that was great. He left town, and then we had him start working with Premier Martial Arts, Master Roger Lacombe. Master Lacombe has a knack for teaching him. And find people, because we can't do this on our own.
No, we
So
can't.
find people that can help. And I'll tell you another great story. I was friends with Don the Dragon Wilson. He is the top kickboxer of all time. I used to do some boxing, and I had Don on the red carpet at Denim and Diamonds. By the way, Denim and Diamonds grew into being one of the largest charity events in
Okay.
California. We had to do it for 4 seasons, and we started getting a lot of stars. So we called it Denim Diamonds and Stars. Well, I had Don the Dragon Wilson on the red carpet about 12, 14 years ago. And I was seeing his Facebook posts. So I said to him, I messengered him, and I said, would you be willing to have my son and his friend Dylan Aragon? Dylan is on the spectrum. He's 28, extremely, able, and now has his black belt. So his mom's a good friend of mine. And I said, would you be willing to have Wyatt and Dylan come to the gym and spar with you? He said, absolutely. And it was amazing, Karen. These boys working with the top kickboxer of all time, right? Don the Dragon Wilson. And he could not have been more generous and loving. And we actually did the Just Two Dads podcast, which is
Yep.
another great podcast.
Right.
Sean Francis and Brian Altunian had me and Sharon and Dylan and Wyatt and Don the Dragon on the podcast to talk about just this subject. How do we nurture, encourage? And I got to tell you, Dylan, he's another, it looks like a miracle, but what it is that his mom, Sharon, keyed into his loves. And this young man is just incredible out there on the mat doing karate, and he helps teach. He helps
That
teach
is
now.
wonderful. And you're keying in on something very important. And I don't want the dads of the world to think that we don't appreciate them, but most of the dads have to work full time, while some of the mothers maybe can spend more time at home with their children. And so I think that's why mothers seem to be a little more in tune with what is going on. But one of the
Agree,
things that,
agree. And let's face it, Karen, at least my husband, and I know Holly Robinson Pete And Rodney Pete went through this. In fact, Rodney wrote a book called Not My Boy about Rodney
Yep.
Jr. Men have a harder time with the diagnosis. I will say that
Yep.
because
They do.
my husband had a very hard time, very. And I had to have the come to Jesus with him. And Holly Robinson Pete had this with Rodney. One day we were at a air show in Point, whatever. And my husband used to fly PT Orions in the Navy during the Vietnam War. And we were looking at all these things. And Wyatt at this point is severely affected and he has no attention span. So his father's trying to show him, he said, here's the plane daddy flew. Well, he's pulling and running and not looking, and Reed gets totally frustrated. He leaves us. He literally abandons us at the air show. Now, this may sound horrible, but I have compassion. I think this is a hard thing for some men because he wanted his son to see the plane that he flew.
Right.
Just like Rodney wanted his son to play football, but they're not necessarily going to be pilots. They're not going to necessarily be football stars. They're going to be who they are meant to be. Wyatt was meant to be an artist, but
Yep.
he's getting his black belt. But anyway, he left us. So for 2 hours, I searched among the crowds looking for him. I finally found him. We got in the car and he said, so I said, don't wait till we get home. I told Wyatt to go. I put Wyatt in his room. He was very young. And I said, listen, I'm raising this child with or without you. So you better decide. And he said, I'm doing it with you. So there can be some really hard moments in a marriage, a lot
Oh,
of,
absolutely.
statistics. But as you said, my son was adopted. There were a lot of struggles. I actually, I failed in vitro, failed egg donor, a failed adoption, a horrific adoption scam. And it was actually on 9/11 that I got a call from the adoption attorney that we had been working with, his assistant. And I had just watched the first tower crumble. And this girl, Karen, called and she said, we have a new birth mother in. And I said, well, number one, everybody thinks I should sue your boss because that adoption scam was something out of Dateline. And I said, and number two, do you see what's going on the television screen? I don't even know if we're going to be alive. The whole country could be
Right.
blown. And she said, I feel different about this one. I have this feeling. And Karen, right at that moment, I call these God shots because I get goosebumps when I think about it. Yeah, I'm watching Peter Jennings, fighting back tears. And literally the second trade crumbles. And I thought about all the families, the children that would be going home to a parent not there. And I thought about, I still had the chance to tell a bedtime story. I still had the chance to give a bath. I still had the chance to welcome, to have a child run up to me and say, Mommy, you're home. And I knew that that was going to be my child. And the amazing thing was that was 9/11. Wyatt was born on 11/9. Talk about star-crossed. Couldn't get out of LAX, got a flight out of Phoenix. And when I met Maggie May, his birth mother, it was clear she was pregnant, unlike posing to be pregnant, like the scam artist. And it's been quite a journey, and it hasn't been an easy one.
And that is what life is. It is a journey. And we have the choices to make it the best journey that we can. It doesn't mean we're not going to stumble because I still continue to. I know you have as
Uh,
well.
You
But
want to talk about my addiction? We touched on that.
absolutely, because
Yeah.
I had an addiction totally different than yours. My addiction became one of food. I just kept running to the food. And if it hadn't been for medication that my son was on that blew him up like a balloon, I wouldn't have seen myself in the mirror. But I looked at him one day and I said, "Oh my God, you're 11 years old and you're wearing men's pants." And when I called the doctor and I said to the doctor, "What is wrong?" He went through the chart and he said, "Oh my God, we got to take him off this medication." And within 2 months, he lost all of his weight. But as he was losing it, I stopped going to the refrigerator. So my addiction really was based on watching him blow up, and I was trying to match him.
Mhm. Quite
Mine
common.
was
And
not
I,
as, yeah.
yeah, I believe food addictions, either bulimia and overeating. I think a lot of special needs parents. I'll say parents, not just moms. I don't want to just say the moms, but like I said, I think becoming an escape artist through substances is rampant in our community.
So how
And
did
I
this
love,
happen for you? Was
okay,
it just a one
so
day?
no. Okay, first of all, I think I was born an alcoholic. My mother was an alcoholic, and not that I blame it on genetics entirely. I just think we alcoholics are different. We're born with an allergy of the mind and the body. And I had issues with addiction my whole life. My mother was an alcoholic. My mother was an amazing woman. She was a real steel magnolia. She was the type of woman that could chop the head off a copperhead and bake the perfect peach cobbler in a day, right? And my mother, my younger brother had Down syndrome, David, and my 6 year younger brother. And in those days, let me tell you, there was not much support. My father was a very successful businessman and he traveled internationally. He left her at home with 3 kids, out making a living. And when she left her family, we moved from North Carolina to Virginia, and that's when the drinking really started.
Got it.
And back in those days, I mean, the term was retard. In fact, the first time I ever felt shame was we were taking David for a walk in his radio flyer wagon, and this boy pulled up on his Stingray named Butch. I know that sounds like it's out of a movie, but it's the truth. And he says, "Retard, retard, your brother is a retard." And I felt shame for the first time because David was our little angel, my older brother John and me. So anyway, I talked to my beloved grandmother about it, and I think this is a really important message. And I
Sure.
didn't like grasp it at the time, but Diddy, that's what we called her. She was the first living saint I ever knew, said, "Oh, that poor, poor boy." And I said, "What, Diddy?" She said, "He doesn't understand. You were chosen to be David's sister." She said, "You are honored." And he's sad. So you be proud because God chose you. And it's so interesting because I never wanted to be like my mother, an alcoholic and pill popper with a disabled child. I became exactly like my mother after my husband died. But back to my addiction, I did every hard drug in the book. I'm not ashamed to say it. I used needles. Whatever I could drink, snort, smoke, or shoot as a teenager. And I'm very lucky to get out of that. But that was all trying to escape shame over my mother's drinking. And unfortunately, my mother did live a long life, but she died an alcoholic, and I've broken the pattern. Um, I can't say enough about, for me, AA, 12-step programs. 12-step God and 12-step program, AA, saved my life. But I'll fast forward. My husband was diagnosed with cancer, my second husband. My first husband, I had marriage to somebody in the entertainment industry, and we both valued our careers over our marriage, and we didn't have children. So I got married late 30s to Reed, and he was diagnosed with prostate cancer 3 years after we were married. And they thought they got it all, but it came back at various points. And he kept ticking. We used to call him the Timex man. And he died 8 years ago, and from the cancer, from the battle with cancer. And it was a long, brutal death. And prior to that, to deal with the stress of having a severely affected autistic child and a husband with illnesses, he had pulmonary embolisms, ruptured aortas, it was all too much. And rather than doing the healthy thing, going to talk therapy and maybe some other holistic types of healing modalities, because there are many out there, body work, all kinds of things. But I started drinking more, and I'd always had issues with, like I said, with alcohol off and on. Got out of the drug use in my 20s, but I found a psychiatrist that prescribed Xanax. And not only did he prescribe it, he kept upping it. Now, you're only supposed to be on that for a month at most. I left him because I was concerned that I was getting addicted. I went to another psychiatrist who upped it more. And so 2 years after my husband died, I found myself barely able to get up in the morning. I jeopardized my job. And in fact, Act Today, which I had helmed for 14 years very successfully and helped give out 3 million in grants to autistic children and families around the nation. I couldn't do my job anymore. I remember one day at work going up to the corner store, getting a bottle of wine and popping some Xanax, sitting in my car, going into my office and throwing up in the trash can next to my desk. And during that time, my brother and I have a couple that live with me in Wyatt, John and Andrea, who are his caregivers. They're really our family, we call them. My brother and John and Andrea said, you're killing yourself. And I knew it. Quite frankly, I wanted to die if I didn't have Wyatt. I was petrified about raising him on my own. And I escaped. I numbed the pain. I couldn't accept life on life's terms. And that happens sometimes to us. But I went into detox to come off the Xanax. I went into rehab for 2.5 months. And I have gone to at least 5 AA meetings a week ever since. That was 5 years ago. I have a sponsor. I have a deep faith, and I serve on 5 ministries at my church. I need a lot to keep me balanced and to keep me going. And the other thing I do is I pray with my son every morning. We do deep breathing together because I think it helps regulate his, he gets overstimulated. We do devotional readings, and we listen to a message from a faith leader, and we say our mantra when he walks out the door. What are we? Thankful, grateful, blessed. We pray together every night before he goes to bed. I've had a lot of loss in my life. My beloved brother, who got me sober, died 2 months ago. I've lost both parents, my younger brother, my husband, my brother. But I have a lot of people, a lot of love in my life. And I wrote something the other day, and I'd love to read it because
Sure, go
I think
ahead.
it's okay. It's called Permission Slip. You don't have to be everything. You don't have to look younger, bludgeon yourself into beauty, win another Emmy, publish another book, scrub the filthy shower tiles, unpack from the trip you took a week ago. Instead, you could go for a hike with your dog Skippy, leave your iPhone behind, look up at the full white moon still suspended in the August morning sky, and breathe. Just breathe. You don't have to help another child with autism or heal the world. You can sit with your own son with autism and give him the gift of you, your presence. It's all he ever wanted. You don't have to get your alcoholic godson sober. You can just call him and take time to listen. Just listen. You don't have to struggle to do Pilates as well as the 30-year-old with the perky breast next to you. Flat stomach. She's 4 decades younger, for God's sake. Stop when you need to. Do child's pose and rest. Just rest. You don't have to hold your bladder to make another call, send another email or text, put someone else's needs over yours. You can pee. Just pee. You don't have to vacuum the tumbleweeds of dog hair in the corners 5 minutes before the dinner guests arrive. They will only see the lit candles, the blooms in vases. Feel your welcome hug. Taste the food, even if it's overcooked, with the secret ingredient of love. You can sit, just sit. You don't have to cross off your to-do list. You can sit with your feelings, sit with the sadness of losing your big brother, your protector, your witness, your cheerleader 2 months ago to cancer, the same way you lost your husband. You can let those tears that have wanted to escape spill over and cry. Just cry. You can stop the striving, the doing, the busyness. Practice what your father used to tell you when sitting in front of a fire. Honey, you need to learn the fine art of doing nothing. You can stop. Just stop. You don't have to tackle your to-do list. You can sit with your feelings, sit with the sadness of losing your brother. You can stop the striving, the doing, the busyness. You don't have to keep asking, what is my purpose in life? Maybe healing your wounds, helping others heal theirs is enough. Maybe your purpose is writing these words right here, right now. I am enough.
And we all have to believe that, because if we don't believe it, our children will not believe that they're enough. And, you know, you and I have so many little things in common. My husband, 2 years ago, just about this time, was diagnosed also with cancer. And when he was diagnosed, the test had come in 3 months earlier, but the doctor had never called to tell him that he had prostate cancer. So the day we got the call, I remember yelling at the doctor's office saying, you had these tests for 3 months. Now you've waited. Now you want him to go through treatment. Like, what's your problem? But then I turned it around and I turned to my husband and I said, okay, we're going to go through treatment. And we went through it together. I went to every treatment with him. And knock on wood, he's cancer free. But we all know that we're all still waiting for that shoe to drop. Okay. I have I have 2 sons. My oldest son accepted his younger brother despite his diagnosis, despite his meltdowns. And yet my younger son, the one who's on the spectrum, in the beginning, really disliked his brother, thinking that he was so perfect. You know what, everybody, we all have a different path to walk. It's about being open and kind and understanding. Up until I realized that I had had an eating disorder, which was my drug, I never would have understood what you went through, Nancy. You have to go through something to be able to understand somebody else. You have to be able to listen to it. And you've got to be authentic with yourself and be honest. Today's the first time I admitted ever that I had that eating disorder. It was easy for me to share it because I'm hearing yours and I'm going, wait a second, I wasn't any different. And
By doing, Brene Brown, the sociologist author, she says, one day you will tell the story of what you went through and overcame, and it will be someone else's survival story.
Absolutely.
Light the way for each other through our hardship, through our pain, through our challenges. None of us are immune, none of us. And that's what life is about, is to light the way for others. My journey, like I said, I feel like my purpose is to heal my pain and help others heal theirs. What ways do I do that? Through helping families with autism, and I did that for a number of years through my writing. And I've got a book coming out, and Marilyn and I will come back on Not Your Mother's Act Three, a guide to surviving and thriving. In the latest chapter, it's for women 65 and over. Um, my greatest ministry is my son and his art and who he is in the world. Because the other thing is, sometimes your greatest accomplishment isn't in something you do, but in someone you raise. I truly believe that.
Absolutely.
So I have to keep Wyatt, because maybe you can tell I'm type A on steroids. So I have to keep Wyatt number one, because it's like, okay, book, bah, 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 bah. Church, no, no, family, Wyatt. Then Wyatt, God,
Yeah.
uh, and some of the things that I can do to help people. My AA, my sobriety. If I don't have my sobriety, I have nothing. Like right after this, I'm going to an AA meeting because that's what I do at noon. Um, and sponsor other women and help them, achieve sobriety. And it's a beautiful life, but I'm going to be 70 next year. This is not something that has come to me overnight.
Right.
I'm a control freak. You don't want to be in this brain the way it used to be before recovery, because there were lots of critters in there. There was hamsters on wheels and monkey mind, and um, it's still a battle for me to be present. I'm trying to learn what it is to be contemplative and to cherish the moment. Um, so every now and then, like I had to unplug on Monday. I went to Sarah Retreat Monastery. They have in Malibu, they have an AA meeting there at noon. And I spent the day there. I spent the day walking the labyrinth, meditating, and crying over my losing my beloved brother.
Sure.
So if I don't take my oxygen every now and then, I will get burnout. And I have been burnout, and I don't want to be there again. I have been on the 4 cappuccinos a day and come home and start drinking the wine. Go up, go down, go up, go down. I don't want to live there. That's no way to live. So I do want to show some of Wyatt's paintings.
I do, but before you share the paintings, I just want to say you do something every week with Wyatt and you post it on Facebook.
Yes.
And for all the parents out there, you've got to see Nancy and Wyatt dancing with love. And it is beautiful. And we all don't have to dance with our kids. There are other things that we can do. And I think if you just allow yourself those moments,
Joy,
then you
joy.
are, yeah. I
They
mean, that's
see
something that you
the moment.
remember.
That's what we have, Karen, is these small moments. All we have, what you and I are doing right now, that's all there is.
That is.
We can't go in
And
the future. The past is gone. The future, the present we hold in our hands. That's why we call it present.
that's right.
If we jump ahead, yeah, I mean, I have so much to worry about. And being present, that's the greatest gift. There's actually a wonderful book by a mentor and teacher of mine. It's called Ordinary Mysticism. It just came out. It's by the brilliant Mirabai Starr, who I have had the privilege of doing retreats with, and I'm going to a retreat with her in November on ordinary mysticism. And she says we're all mystics. She says it's, how do you find the sacred in your to-do list? How do you find the sacred? Well, I try to start the day when I wake up before I do my breath work with Wyatt and my own meditation and prayer. I look at Skippy and I listen to him breathe, and I rub his speckled belly, and then I open the blinds and I see the hummingbird out by the feeder, And to me, my mother comes back as a hummingbird. Then I look at the geraniums that, I actually took time to plant with my own hands. I took a break one Saturday. That's where the joy is. And we're going to have sorrow. We're going to have pain. I've had my share, but I try to make a garden of all the things I've lost.
Yes,
And like I said, it's a beautiful life. Every day's a gift from God, even the ones that have left their scars. And if you're going through it, we're all right there with you, man. None of us, we're all just walking each other home.
that's
That's what
right.
Ram Dass said, the great spiritual leader Ram Dass. We're all just walking each other home. And isn't that the truth?
Yeah, absolutely. And the joy for Wyatt, you can see in his paintings.
Yes.
When you sent them to me today, and I'm going to put that link out there of a group of paintings, because as I looked at them, I couldn't stop smiling. It was like, and many of I've seen before, but it's like, wow, look how he captured that. Look at the
Well, he
beauty.
captures the pets and very well. He paints all kinds of things, but kind of dog and cat and animal portraits have become his thing, and people commission him. And this is one he just did of our dog Skippy.
That is beautiful. That's the one that really got me.
And it so captures Skippy. And then he did uh, this one of Dakota, our white shepherd.
Very nice.
And he doesn't do, oh, he just finished this hairless cat for somebody.
Oh, wow.
And he does other things. I did want to show one painting. Um, this, my best friend who has a beach cottage just bought called Summer Wave. And she asked him to paint clouds for her. So he did clouds for her. So anyway, you can find him on Art Autism on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me on Facebook at Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson. You can find me on Instagram at Jumpin' Nan. My website is nancyalspaugh.com, although it's outdated. I haven't had time to do that because I've been trying to look at the hummingbirds.
Yeah,
And,
feel that.
and Karen, I know you and I have talked about doing a regular podcast, and I would really love to do that. I've got two book projects right now. I've got a book with Wyatt called All Dogs Get Lollipops in Heaven. And that's in acquisition with the publisher right now. We're waiting for that to go through. So Paola, his teacher, and Wyatt and I will be very busy when we have to finish that. And then, like I said, Not Your Mother's Act 3, a guide to thriving, not just surviving, your final chapter. And a couple of times a month, I run an equine therapy program and animal healing program for addicts and alcoholics, because I did that when I was in rehab and I loved it. So I started a program called Recovery at the Ranch where Wyatt took assisted writing. And I've been doing that for a couple of years. So I'm busy, but you know what? I'm doing things that I love. I'm not doing the shoulds.
And
For
it
too many
is,
years of my life, television, I loved it, but it was, it didn't feed my soul.
well, you're feeding our soul right now, which I think is phenomenal. And that's why I have been nagging at Nancy to do this podcast and keep doing them, because there are so many of us that just need a little bit more support. I mean, my son is 34 years old. He now lives 1,000 miles away. He's working in an industry that he loves, but yet he calls me every day. And I know he needs that connection. And when he's stressed, he knows that I'm the sounding board, not his dad. And he can say some things to me that can be hurtful, but I understand where they're coming from, because he doesn't want to say the wrong thing to the wrong person, and mom is the safe zone. So for you moms out there, and I read this today on one of the sites, my child hates me. They're always telling me what I do wrong. You know what? Child doesn't hate you. You're their sounding board. And you need to find a way to communicate. And I will tell you, if you would have told me this 20 years ago when he was 14 years old and going through puberty on the spectrum, I would have told you all that you were crazy, that my life was a mess. And you know what? I now can look back and see those beautiful moments. So,
We
Nancy,
have to, Karen. I'm telling you, we're all members of the Kitchen Floor Club, right? We've
is
all been down on that kitchen floor on our knees. I'd like to close with something I wrote the other day
sure.
because I think it kind of sums up. Okay, I called it Runaway Train. And this is me having a conversation with the voice inside my head that does the shoulds. 6:30 a.m. I crack open his door. He's still asleep. I slide under the covers into a sweat lodge. The weighted blankets lie on top of us like 6 feet of heavy snow. How can he sleep like that? I ask. It's supposed to calm him down on the nights his brain and body are on fire, she says. You're not supposed to do this. You spent 17 years and a small fortune to teach him not to cling, she says. Funny thing is, he wasn't born from my womb, yet for 22 years he's wanted to be inside it. I can't resist the smell of his breath, no longer sweet like a child's, red stubble on his chin, a pimple forming, the same freckles across his nose that showed up the summer he was 3. His eyelids flutter, then eyes open wide. He whispers, Mom, a Christmas morning look of surprise. I love you more than anything in the whole wide world. Our standard goodbye. You're not supposed to do this, she says. Please let me stay in this sacred sweat lodge before I jump back on the runaway train, before this holy moment is gone, gone, gone.
Thank you so much. We will do this again. I'm not letting too much time go. So I will be emailing you regularly. We'll have all of their information in the show notes. And please feel free to reach out to me or Nancy. Uh, we're here to help. That's
We're
what,
here to help. I just want to say shalom, blessings, and namaste. And thank you for having me, Karen. You're phenomenal.
thank you. Appreciate it. Bye now.